Okay, so we're going through Bill Robertie's amazing book, How to Play the Opening in Backgammon. It's beautifully encyclopedic in all its detail. And chapter 3, he just focuses on the 5 point. And the way he structures the chapter, he takes a role where you can make the 5 point or you can do something else. And he goes through all the various different positions and why sometimes you'll make the 5 point and sometimes you'll do the something else move instead. And part A, which is going to get a video of its own, he just looks at roles where you can make the 5 point or you can make the 20 point. So the golden point or the golden anchor, and goes through all the different reasons why you might make one or the other. It's taken me a long, long time to study this chapter and look at other analysis and experts about this because it's very thorough. So let's just starting off on the board. The 5 point, I call it the golden point. It's all things being equal, it's the best point you can make. Second best point you can make is the 20 point. I call it the golden anchor. Paul McGreal originally called that the golden point. Doesn't really matter. So it's our 5 point or our opponent's 5 point are the two best points we can make. So the 5 point is considered the best point you can make, followed by the 20 point, which would be followed by the 4 point, which would be followed by the 21 point, and so on. But all things aren't equal. And there are times where it's better to make one or the other option. The 5 point, just a little, you'll know this at this stage already. The 5 point is great for priming. It blocks our opponent in a bit. It gives us a new homeboard point, and it allows us very often to unstack the 6 point. Don't forget, we have the 5 checkers and the 6 point, so it's a heavy 6 point, and making the 5 point, if we can take one off the 6 point, is a huge positive development in our structure. 20 point is brilliant though too. Gets us the advanced anchor. It means that we're immune to any attempts by our opponent to prime us or blitz us. We've got a really good holding game going on. And it makes, just as we were talking about unstacking our 6 point, if we hold their 5 point, they can't unstack their 6 point. So for that reason, the 20 point is a very desirable point to make as well. I said there were lots of other analysts. Bill Robertie goes through it in a phenomenal amount of depth. But also Dan Rivera on Backgammon is Beautiful does an interview with Alex Ashagian where they go through a number of positions where you can choose one or the other. Alex Ashagian then has in his own channel has a couple of videos on precisely this, making one or the other, and also on Backgammon Galaxy, Mark Olson does a great quiz about whether you should make the 5 point or not, and I'll come back to that in a couple of the later videos as well. But what I find difficult is just there are so many factors to come in. The first 6 there are from Bill Robertie, maybe the first 7, and then the others thrown in from Alex Ashagian as well. And it took me weeks to get my head around this. Look, they're all important. Are we winning or losing? Determines whether we make the defensive point or the attacking point. Which point is harder to make? What does the distribution look like after each play? Has our opponent brought builders down to the outfield? All of these points, I won't even go through them all, are important. And I just need to get my head around this. I needed to get my head around this, particularly as, look, how many times do you get a role where you have to choose between the 5 point and the 20 point? Maybe 3 or 4 times a year. So that's a lot of factors to kind of memorize and learn off for 3 or 4 times a year. And I spent a lot of time trying to work out, well, are some factors more important than others? And the answer is definitely yes. I was thought I'd be doing a video about the order of priority. But last weekend, I had a brainwave. I say it before. I've said it many times before, and I make no claims to be an expert in backgammon. I'm a student who's studying the game and making these videos just so I can learn for myself. But sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, I'm a goddamn genius. And I was sat there. My son was about to play a rugby final. I was sat there waiting for him, and I had a eureka moment that makes this so straightforward. And it allows you nearly all those factors that you saw in the last slide. You can abandon the key. It's just one thing. Bear in mind, it's all about the priming battle. Whether you choose to make the 5 point or the 20 point. If you remember the videos we did about Mitchie's opening concepts book, his Proverb 20. I love the title of it. How good do you feel about your prime? And as I was kind of going through this and kind of working through this lesson, I realized it comes down to that concept 100%, and it's foolproof and it works every single time. So I'm delighted with this. It's not that you throw out all the other factors, but all the other factors relate to the single question: how good do you feel about your priming battle? If you're going to be ahead in the prime, you want to make the 5 point. The 5 point is a priming point, and if we're going to have the stronger prime and we can make the 5 point, we make it. However, if we're not going to do well in a priming battle, we don't make it. We're like if imagine a football team who are really bad at headers, they're not going to spend their the match trying to throw up balls to be headed, because it's not playing to their strengths. If we're not good at priming, we don't take that game plan and instead we make the 20 point instead, and as a default option. And this works so smoothly. I have loads and loads of positions. I'm afraid this is going to be a slightly long video because I just basically took all the positions I could find relating to this question of the 5 point and the 20 point, and I've put them in here. And you'll find that the question about priming works every single time, which is beautiful. The big thing is there are two major factors behind making a good prime. So if you want to be making a prime, if you're engaging in a priming battle, there's two things you're looking out for. One is distribution, and in particular, those 2 points there are massive. We are in a strong priming game if we have unstacked our 6 point. That's a good thing. If we can unstack our 6 point, we are likely to have a very good distribution for a prime. Also, it's a bad thing if we have weakened our 8 point. We start off with 3 checkers in our 8 point. If we take that spare off the 8 point and only have the 2 checkers left, we've really weakened our chances to use checkers from our 8 point, and our priming capacity is poor. And I'm going to come back to this as the video goes on. That nearly becomes the most significant thing of all when it comes to making the 5 point. And the second thing about making a good prime is we need timing. If we're behind in the race, we should prime. If it's a prime versus prime battle, the person who's behind in the race will usually win because the other person's prime will crunch up eventually. And the other thing that I made videos for Wicklow Backgammon Club, an introductory course, and I think it's the second lesson of backgammon. For complete beginners, we tell them if you're ahead in the race, you race, and we just need to bear that in mind. So if we're behind in the race, we're going to prime. If we're ahead in the race, we're going to race. And if we're ahead in the race, it means our timing is very poor to try and make a prime, so we don't make the 5 point. So that was my eureka moment, and it just works so well through all of this. Just to say that if you've made the 5 point, even if you've made the 5 point, if your structure and your timing aren't right, you're not going to win by priming. So let's look at a few positions, and as I said, there's going to be rather a lot of these. So here's one. We started off with a 4-1 and played it kind of as you'd expect. Our opponent wrote a 4-2 and made a point to their home board. We've now got a 4-3 to play. Well, there's options. Certainly, we can make our 5 point with the 4-3, and coming in 9-5 and 8-5 makes our point. But just have a quick look at the structure down the bottom there. I've just isolated here. Anytime we have a structure like this, alarm bells should be ringing if we're hoping to make a prime, because all those checkers stacked up in the 6 point are really, really inflexible. Yes, we've made our 5 point and we can, pat ourselves on the back about that, but it's really not going to do anything in the way of priming as long as we have 5 checkers up in the 6 point. It's just too inflexible. So when we get this position here, if we said, Mitchie's thing, how good do you feel about your prime? Well, our opponent, in terms of timing, yes, we're slightly ahead of race, not significantly, but timing isn't particularly in our favour. But in terms of distribution, our opponent has a much better distribution. They have unstacked their 6 point. They have a little bit more flexibility. They've made a priming point of their own, but they have more capacity. They're more likely to be able to improve on that in future rolls. So we're not going to be the strongest in the priming race. That alarm bell structure on the bottom is a killer. And so instead we put that back. We say, look, we're not going to be winning at the prime, so we make the racing point instead, the holding point instead. We play 4-3 up the top there, 4 from the back, on level the 3, and we've made our a good defensive point, which is better than trying to prime. And as you can see, look at that, 80 millipoint. It's practically a blunder to have made our 5 point there. And it is one thing, it's worth, you know, I said a lot of positions. I think it's worth going through this because the penalty, usually in the opening game, you don't get penalised very much for mistakes. When it comes to the 5 point versus the 20 point, sometimes you see the cost of doing the wrong thing is quite significant. If you compare that last position to this position now, here's a situation where an opponent has run a back checker, played 6-4 and run it. So straight away, they're in a racing game rather than a priming game. They've done nothing, if you look up the top there, to improve their prime or priming chances. So we could, again, with the 4-1, we can make the 20 point, like that. Nice defensive anchor. A lot to be said for having a nice anchor. But here we're the ones who, if there's a priming battle, we're the ones who are going to do better. So now we should make the priming the 5 point. So we play 9-5 again. We have the great thing about this roll is we can unstack the 6 point with the 1. And if you look at there, look at our 8 point. There's a spare checker on our 8 point still, so we're very flexible. We've great hope that we can extend this prime. So if it does come down to a priming battle, we're stronger. And therefore we make the 5 point. And again, look again, big error not to this time. That was our kind of our starting position that I kind of showed you. If I just move black back and change black structure, we're in exactly the same position. We've rolled this 4-3 again. Now I look at it and say, well, who's going to be better in a priming position? Black up the top there has 2 big chimney stacks that are just not good for priming. So now there's a bit more attraction to us to prime. We could play safe and defensively, but we're better off making the 5 point because we're ahead in that and the priming idea. And it's not just 4s. All the early positions seem to have a 4 in it. Now we've got a 3 and a 1. Well, a 3 and a 1, I think you'd probably make the right move here automatically, but just let's look at why. Okay? Let's look at black up the top there first of all. Have they a good priming structure? No. They've made their 3 point. It's not a great priming point. There's a lot of gaps in there. I mean, it could potentially, if a lot of things went the way, create a good prime, but it's very unlikely. The other thing Bill Robertie says is, in terms of which point is harder to make, usually the 20 point is harder to make. But in this position here, we've already split from 24 to 20, so we've already gone the first step down the road of making the 20 point. So it's not it'll be easier to make it in the future if we need to. However, down the bottom, if we were to make our 5 point, we would unstack the 6 point, we'd still have a spare on the 8 point. Everything about that is nice, and for that reason, it's clearly better to make our 5 point here. We're going to win the priming battle. And the more and more I looked at this, the more I realised that when it comes to distribution in terms of prime, the biggest thing I think you can look at is, do we have spares in the 8 point? Mitchie talks about having spares in the 13 point to bring down for a prime. Machi, I think it was, who talks about that. For me, it's having spares in the 8 point, and as the more I put positions into XG, the more having the spare in the 8 point was seismic. So let me give you a few examples. This is the example I showed you there, where making the 5 point was clearly better. It was an 82 millipoint blunder not to make the 5 point. But if you look at the bottom left quadrant there, we have 4 checkers in our 8 point. If I took one of them off our 8 point and just put it back a little, now when it comes to what should we do with the 3-1, it's still right to make the 5 point. But when we do so, we're going to have we'll have stripped our 8 point. We'll have 2 checkers on our 8 point. And for that reason, now it's gone from being an 82 millipoint blunder not to right down to a 19 millipoint. It's come right down because if one simple change, I just took 1 checker off our 8 point. And I even played around this position again and said, well, look, we set up the top there. Black had a poor priming position. What if we make it slightly better? And instead of giving them the 3 point, we give them their 4 point, which is better for their priming. Now we're going to strip our 8 point if we make our 5 point. Now we can undermine their prime by jumping with 24 to 20. And suddenly 24 to 20 becomes the right roll. So you can see it's not as easy as just, a 3-1 makes the 5 point. We need to be thinking about who is the stronger priming chances. what we can do to disrupt their prime. How many checkers do we have in the 8 point? Because that was the position we've just looked at. And I said, well, look, really doesn't matter. We saw that in this position we were better off making the 20 point rather than playing just 2 checkers down and making the 5 point. What happens if I take it, the bottom left quadrant, that checker I took off for 8 point, if I put that back on the 8 point, does that make a difference? Absolutely. Suddenly now the right move is to make the 5 point. I cannot stress this enough. Having the spare checker on the 8 point is seismic. And if you're not sure what point to move, I'd say first thing to do is look at the distribution towards the prime according to how many checkers we have in the 8 point. Now here are just a few other positions I just thought I'd show you. Again, the idea of how do we feel about our prime tells you everything here. So down the bottom we have spare checkers on our 8 point. We can make our 5 point easy. 3-1 just make the 5 point. Surely, that's what we've been ingrained into us since our early days playing backgammon. No. Who the hell are we priming there? If we make our 5 point, black has already escaped. Black rolled double sixes and has passed that. We're past that. So how good do we feel about our priming battle here? Not good at all, because black has just taken us out of the game. So forget about priming and let's make a more defensive point. And it's quite simple up the top there. There's no point making our 5 point, but we can make our 20 point and have a bit of a holding game going on and a blunder to make our 5 point on this occasion. Here's another situation I just gave here. This time black rolled 6-5 at the start and ran the whole way. What should we do? Well, we are going to strip our 8 point if we make our 5 point, but it's a holding game. Sorry, it's a priming game. There, black is committed to a racing game at this stage. So for that reason, we're probably better off making the 5 point. But as you see, there's not much in the difference. But if I change that up a bit, and here's just another position I found was interesting where we get multiple checkers back. Black has options. They might make their bar point next go. We can make our 5 point, but we'd end up with that awful structure again. If we make our 5 point, we've got the alarm bell structure that I kind of keep highlighting there. Let's not make our alarm bell structure. Instead, let's just play safely and hit and make our 20 point. We could get hit in our outfield there, but you know what? That at least we've got a strong holding point and defensive point in their board. Here's another situation where it's quite close. The black has no prime going on, so we would be ahead if we play and make our 5 point. There's a slight extra incentive to do so in that the blot we have in our 9 point is vulnerable if we don't make our 5 point. So for that reason, it's slightly better. Black has nothing going on priming. And then I just took a couple of positions that, I was looking at first, second row positions there. Now we're into kind of slightly more 2 or 3 positions down. It moves into the game. What should we do here? Well, we've 3 checkers at the back. And 3 checkers at the back usually means you want an anchor. So you might be forgiven for saying, let's make an anchor here. We're much stronger, we're safer. Black has 11 checkers in the zone. They're attacking, that's, the move to do. However, let's just go back there and see. Let's look and see what happens. If we use the 4th lead to make our 5 point, what does that look like? Well, now we've got a nice flat priming structure. Yeah, we don't have a spare on the 8 point, but we've made the rack, the 6, 5, and 4 point. We're behind in the race, which will favour a prime. We're nice distribution there. It's the start of quite a nice prime there. We might be able to make that up into a 5 prime quite quickly. So even though black is attacking, even though black has 11 checkers in the zone, making the 5 point there is just a better timing and distribution work both in favour of making the 5 point. But I take that position, and all I'm going to do is, if you look on the top right, we have a checker on our 22 point, the third of our white blots up there. I'm just going to take that checker and I'm going to move it from the 22 point to our 11 point. So just shut that forward there. Otherwise, the position is exactly the same. What should we do? Well, if we make our 5 point, we have the same lovely attractive distribution as we had before, but just look at the pip count on the column on the right hand side there. We're now well ahead in the race. So what happens when you're well ahead in the race with the prime? You eventually start to crunch and your prime becomes worthless. So because of that, because of the impact that's going to have the race lead has on us, we're now in the lead. We don't want, this position came from Mark Olsen, and he's very strong about whether you make the 5 point. For him, a lot of it comes down to timing. We don't have the timing to engage in the priming game here. So if we're not doing the priming game, we may opt instead to make the defensive anchor. Simple as. And again, it's clearly the better move to make the holding point. Distribution is key for me. Timing definitely for Mark Olsen was very important as well. So here's the situation again, which I just thought was interesting. We have a 4-3. Black has advanced anchor. We can make our 5 point with the 4 and the 3, but it's not particularly attractive. You know, Black can hop us past us if needs be. We're making our 5 point, but the fact that Black has advanced so much means 5 point is less good as a blocking point. And we're back to that alarm bell structure, which means priming is never going to be possible for us anyway. So for that reason, we're better off just the holding game with Black. And if Black does hit us down the bottom there, you know what, they'll have broken their anchor and we might be able to hit them back. However, if we go from the 4-3 that we rolled, and instead we're in a situation where we're 4-1, and again, we can make our 20 point or we can make our 5 point. Now if we make our 5 point, we'll be taking one of our checkers off our 6 point. We love taking checkers off our 6 point. It's a really efficient use of it. So for that reason, it suddenly becomes the right thing to do. So again, it's all about distribution. And finally, just a couple of ones I just show you. This one here, Black is not has run, is not threatening us, so we're better off. There's not much in it, to be honest. I put that in for inclusivity's sake, and also to compare it to a different position that's coming up next. There's not much in it, but the fact is that we're still making we're still making the alarm bell structure with the 5 checker and the 6 point. If we were to make the 5 point, but there's nothing in it. But the real reason I have that position here is if I change that to a 4-1 situation where now we can make our 20 point or take one of our 6. You can imagine by now taking the checker off the 6 point is so important that suddenly it becomes clearly right. Huge error not to make the 5 point. All we did was just make it that we can take a checker off the 6 point in making our 5 point. So finally, I appreciate this has been a long video, but I just wanted to show you all the positions, really to show you that it becomes, you said, just think about it in terms of, can we make a prime? Are we going to win a priming battle? And when it comes to priming, distribution and timing are so important that you don't need to learn off any of the other factors. So I think you'll find these test yourself questions very straightforward. Here's the first one. It's very like the one we started with. Do you make your 5 point here or do you make your 20 point? If you want to pause, and assuming you've unpaused, well, look at the 5 point. What have we got? We've got the alarm bell structure, so let's not go there. So instead, bad structure for a prime. If we were to make a 5 point, instead we make our 20 point, and it's not disastrous, but it's always going to work if you think about it in terms of who's got the stronger priming position. And then here's the second position for you, and again, you can kind of see it's pretty obvious. If you've listened at all during this video, you'll know this straightforwardly, but if you pause, and again, assuming you've unpaused, we can make our 20 point, nice defensive anchor, all very good there. And we would be worrying about Black coming out from the back and hitting our the bottom left quadrant, but that's not why we do the correct move. The correct move is 4-1, as you can imagine, is 9-5, and the big thing is we unstack our 6 point. We've now got the spare on the 8, we've got the unstacked 6 point. We're in good position for priming. We're going to win the priming battle. Even though we're slightly ahead in the race, we've just such a nice structure here that it's the right move. A blunder not to do that move. So, sorry, quite a long video there about quite a short concept, but it's just worth getting right. And I think that idea, just to emphasize again, Bill Robertie goes through all his positions and he checklists all the different factors you can have in mind. Alex is shaggy and something similar in his videos. But just if you think about it, 5 point, if we make the 5 point, we're trying to win a priming battle. If we don't have the capacity to win a priming battle because of distribution and timing, well, then don't try and make the 5 point, make the 20 point instead. That was the first part of Bill Robertie's chapter, the 5 point. The next chapter, we're looking at other things you can do. The other video will look at other things you can do instead of making the 5 point. There's times where the 5 point is the obvious move, but there's times where there are better things to do. And that video will be coming up shortly.